Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin.
Hello and welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with board-certified criminal trial attorney Daniel T. Geherin. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist. One of the most high-profile criminal justice cases in the last decade involved actor Alec Baldwin, who accidentally shot a cinematographer on the set of one of his new movies in New Mexico. Dan, welcome back. I'm excited to talk about this case.
I'm glad to be here, Kevin. Thank you.
Did you follow this case? And if so, can you just sort of give everybody a little bit of a background on what happened?
I did. Not only am I always interested in anything in the criminal justice realm, but my brother happens to live in Albuquerque, and so he had some close interest in this too. But, in a nutshell, probably everyone knows this, but Alec Baldwin was an actor and a producer on a movie set in Albuquerque. And during a rehearsal for filming in a small church, he had what he thought was a prop gun, and he was pointing it at the actor across from him and either pulled the trigger or accidentally pulled the trigger. And the one bullet hit two people. It injured an assistant director and killed a cinematographer. And he ultimately was charged with involuntary manslaughter, as was the film's armorer, who allegedly was negligent in providing the what should have been not live ammunition. And they were both prosecuted. There's been a series of lawsuits that have come from this. Mr. Baldwin's case is over, which I'm happy to talk about. The armorer was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and is, I understand it, currently serving a prison sentence.
Wow. Yeah, it's I always am interested by this because, there's been situations where this has happened before. Most famously, Brandon Lee from The Crow was shot on set. I know this isn't your area of expertise, but why is live ammunition even on these sets? I don't understand.
No one understands it. In this case, I don't even think they ever found an answer as to how live ammunition got in there, except for just pure stupidity and negligence.
Yeah.
But, actors would assume that, especially someone like Baldwin, who's been acting for 30 years, that it's not live ammunition. It's a prop gun, maybe a blank. Would never guess that there's one live bullet in there that had such tragic consequences.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so sad, but also just so bizarre. What type of lawsuits and prosecutions came out of the case? You mentioned Baldwin's is over and that the armorer is in prison. What else came out of this?
So the wrongful death, which is a civil lawsuit, that is the husband of the cinematographer who died, and their son filed what's called a wrongful death action, where they have said that Baldwin specifically, the armorer specifically, and probably the team that produced the movie, the production team, and so forth, were negligent in causing their wife and mother's death, and that's still ongoing. And if ultimately that's successful, that will be a financial settlement or verdict for the decedent's husband and son. Now, the criminal prosecution is the state of New Mexico coming after these two people, one of whom they got, and probably rightfully so, the armorer, one of whom they probably should have never gone after, Alec Baldwin. In that case, not only dissolved, it exploded in the prosecutor's face, and they have egg on their face as he had his charges dismissed, and that is done and over with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably don't realize that Alec Baldwin was found not guilty or it was dropped, right?
It was dropped. Great question, great distinction. So in a very small nutshell, the police and prosecutors failed to turn over what the judge determined to be favorable evidence or favorable discovery. And that was one of several what the judge thought was ethical violations. And so she didn't even let it get to the jury, and she dismissed the case with prejudice. And just very recently, it's been decided there will not be any appeal of that. So it is 100% over against Baldwin.
Mm-hmm. I remember hearing stuff at the time that there was like some rumors of maybe some drug use and partying and stuff like that. Do you know if that ever came out in court?
I don't think it ever came out in court. I mean, it seemed like it was a sloppy movie set in the sense of just, budget cuts and not enough staff, and people that were in charge were, as you said, maybe slacking off. The armorer herself didn't have any real experience and probably was in way over her head. So I think that was sort of this culmination of factors that led to live ammunition being brought in. And like I said, such tragic consequences ended up killing a poor woman that was just there doing her job.
Yeah. So can you talk about manslaughter charges, how they are, how they're handled in the state of Michigan?
Yeah, most states mimic Michigan. We have both what's called voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. Again, in a nutshell, voluntary manslaughter is, yeah, I killed this person, but I did it with some justification, some provocation, some heat of passion. It didn't rise to the level of murder. I didn't have premeditation. I didn't have the intent necessary to commit a murder. So that's saying I did it, but here's why, and it's manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, the more juicy of the two, which is exactly what Baldwin was charged with, is you didn't mean to kill a person, but you're charged criminally because either you acted so recklessly or so negligently that your actions have consequences and you are to be punished. It's a very interesting charge. It's a very juicy charge because it's, once again, this sort of interplay between criminal and civil liability. It's a type of crime that doesn't really show an intent, but they can still prosecute and often do prosecute people for involuntary manslaughter. Of note, some states have vehicular manslaughter. Michigan really doesn't, but that's something that happens on the roadside where you involuntarily kill someone through your negligent actions.
What is the required intent for someone to be charged with a crime?
Yeah, so we all learned back in law school this fancy phrase called mens rea, that you have to have a guilty mind essentially to be charged with any crime. Crimes cannot generally be accidental. They cannot happen when someone is sleeping and they're inadvertent. You have to have some at least general intent to commit a crime. Crimes are either going to fall in that general intent, like a drunk driving. You didn't intend necessarily to drink and drive, but you intended to drive and you intended to drink.
Right.
Or what we call specific intent. Most theft offenses, I intended to steal. I intended to break into that person's home. And some assault crimes fall in both of those categories. I intended to harm or I intended to cause injury in this case. And then you have what I talked about before, that recklessness, that sort of outlier in involuntary manslaughter and some other charges, which is you were so darn reckless, so darn negligent here that we're going to bring you into the criminal system. It's sort of the weird stepchild of the intent system, but something worthy of talking about at times as well.
Is it was an accident or a mistake? Are these realistic defenses?
Mistake, generally, no. Mistake of the law, ignorance of the law, generally is not going to get someone out of a prosecution or out of even a conviction. Accident can be a very viable defense. You know, the classic example is someone's cleaning his gun and it goes off, shoots the neighbor next door. And then the prosecution would have to decide, is that simply an accident that we're not going to prosecute? Or were you so negligent? Were you so foolish in doing that, aiming it, not being careful with it, that we're going to bring the criminal justice home to bear? So, you know, accidents a very interesting issue of the law. Generally speaking, you're not going to be prosecuted for a pure accident, but unless the prosecution and police believe that your actions were so negligent that you just don't survive an accidental defense.
Mm-hmm. Back to the Baldwin case, was it unusual that the prosecution failed to turn over evidence? You mentioned that they had egg on their face, but it seems like it was kind of out of the ordinary, right?
No doubt. And what they did here, almost unheard of, they made a choice. You know, sometimes you see cases where the police and prosecutors, they weren't aware of something or there was something that was inadvertently not turned over. They made a choice in this instance not to turn over some ammunition to the Baldwin team. And I think that's what came back to haunt them. The Supreme Court of the United States, each state's Supreme Courts basically say if you have an intentional discovery violation, intentional failure to turn over evidence, if they can show there's bad faith in that, 9 out of 10 times there's going to be some serious consequences for the police and prosecutor. Now, is it rare that a judge will intervene and throw out a murder or manslaughter case? It is. But let's not discount the celebrity of Baldwin and all of that in that decision. But unusual what the prosecutors did, ugly what they decided, and rare what the judge did, but give her credit because she did the right thing.
Do you think it was because of his celebrity that the prosecutors maybe went for something they shouldn't have?
Seemed like it. I mean, they went through a series of prosecutors, if I remember. It started with a local prosecutor, then went to the attorney general and the state. Many prosecutors came and went. It seemed like they did have sort of a vendetta to get him, whether it was public pressure in New Mexico, whether it was pressure from the decedent's family, or they wanted the attention that often prosecutors do in a high-profile case. Either way, they came out looking terribly in what they did and how it ended up.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last one you made about the attention, because obviously there's a long list of celebrity trials where the prosecution team becomes household names. Doesn't always go in a good way, but perhaps that was a bit of a motivating factor, considering they probably don't get these cases come their way very often with someone as high profile as Alec Baldwin.
That's true. And had the judge not intervened, it's my firm opinion that he would have been found not guilty, and they could have chalked that up to, oh, well, we didn't like the jury, whatever. But the way it happened, in my view, justice was served, should have never been charged to begin with, in my opinion.
So you said this was more embarrassing for the prosecutor, the way that the judge threw it out, because of the fact that rather than if they had lost the case?
No doubt, because not only is it thrown out in the throes of a trial, they look to be keystone cops and prosecutors, but they may face some ethical violations. Prosecutors have an ethical obligation to not just convict, but to seek justice. And if they play games like this, they may find themselves in trouble with their state bar. We'll see.
What could happen if they are found to be in trouble?
Well, classic example, taking you way back 20 years, the Duke Lacrosse case, the prosecutor there, he ended up disbarred. He was lucky he wasn't charged with crimes, but he was disbarred. And that's unlikely and unheard of on a discovery violation like this. But prosecutors can be suspended. They can lose their bar license for a period of time. There could be lawsuits against them from the Baldwin team. It'd be interesting to see if that's a route that they decide to go on.
Yeah, the Duke one was horrific. I mean, that guy should have gotten prosecuted. I mean, in my opinion, this is just my podcaster opinion, but yeah, I mean, at least three, young men's lives were ruined because of the false accusations.
You're right. And it goes to show you prosecutors have to have that duty to seek justice, not just to convict. And they sometimes get blinded by the public eye and the attention that comes with the high profile case. And it cannot happen the way that it did with Duke or with Baldwin case.
You've mentioned discovery a few times. Just for anybody listening who's not familiar with that term, what is discovery and how does the process unfold?
So whether it's a criminal or civil case, you're entitled to everything the other side has for the most part. There are rules, there are guidelines, there are case law that dictate that. So anything that the prosecutor and police have in their possession, you're entitled to it. You're specifically entitled to anything that shows what we call exculpatory or exoneration, something that might prove your client's innocence. And a failure to turn over that discovery can be a big time violation of discovery rules and possibly the law. You also have to sometimes be creative in how you get discovery through freedom of information requests, through making motions with the court, because sometimes what the prosecutor, the police, or the other side has isn't sufficient, and there are other materials out there. Classic example, maybe you want the hospital records from a witness or a victim, and they're not providing those. You might have to be creative in how you get those. So discovery is sort of the broad term for everything in a case that the other side has and to which you are entitled.
How do you know kind of if you're getting everything you're supposed to have? I mean, that are they required by law or by ethics or whatever to give you everything, or do you have to make sure that you're getting everything?
A little bit of both. So,
Okay.
And it largely depends on where you practice and your trust level with your opponents. And I happen to be in a very, good county here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where they play by the rules and they turn over what they're supposed to. But there are certainly examples where I've seen some evidence after a case has ended or a trial where I thought, boy, I needed that. And you have to make motions and file appeals and things like that. But for the most part, generally everything that the prosecutor and police have or through which we can get freedom of information and motions are generally turned over to us.
So now, taking all of what you just taught me about discovery back to the Baldwin case, how what was the process that they did not do correctly, and how what should they have done?
Little confusing, but someone dropped off some ammunition at the Albuquerque State Police post while the investigation was going and said, take a look at this. This might have some live ammunition in it, similar to what was delivered to the movie set. And the police and prosecutors decided we're not going to do anything with that, nor are we going to tell the Baldwin defense team about this ammunition. And I think they were trying to sort of win their case without revealing that there could have been an accidental live ammunition put into that shipment or something along those lines. It's hard to know their motivations, but by not telling the defense team and the police then with egg on their faces as the defense team learns it, the judge just felt that was an egregious violation in the middle of trial and didn't even let it get to the jury.
Wow, that's a pretty big oopsie, huh?
Oopsie's one word for it. Intentional mess up is another. So,
wow. Okay. So in that situation, what should they have done? They should have. Tell me what they should have done.
they should have had a police officer or detective write a report about it, submit that report to the defense team, and made the bullets, the ammunition that was delivered, open to the defense inspection. That's the way that you are up and up. That is the way that the discovery laws mandate, and it could be what we said earlier was exculpatory evidence and information. Show it to the defense, and they would have had no such discovery violation blow up in their face.
Wow, that's so crazy. I didn't know that part of it. I knew Alec Baldwin was, I didn't really know how he was, but I knew that he wasn't being prosecuted anymore. But wow, that's so interesting. So what, for any defense attorneys, for any attorneys, young attorneys, what should they learn from this? What should they take away, in your opinion?
Yeah, the biggest one is eventually you might do some high profile cases. Don't get blinded by the idea of, celebrity or by the cameras and be someone you're not and commit an ethical violation just to win, because it can come back to haunt you. That's sort of the biggest issue for high profile attorneys that may get to those types of cases. But then also make sure that you are finding out if you are getting everything. You can ask these questions of detectives. You can do freedom of information requests. You can make motions of the court. Don't always assume you have everything until you have asked those questions of the police during trial, before trial, in pre-trial motions. In short, to answer your question, Kevin, is do your diligence long and hard before a case ever goes to trial.
Yeah, for sure. Good advice. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Michigan Justice Chronicles with board certified criminal trial attorney Daniel T. Geherin. If you'd like to get in touch with Dan and the team, head to glgmichigan.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review if you have a second. We appreciate it. All right, Dan, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for the conversation.
And thanks for having us, Kevin. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.